where we are collecting stories of how COVID 19 impacted various communities in Charlotte, Mecklenburg County. Today is April 18th, 2023, and this week there were 30 reported cases of COVID 19 in the Charlotte, Mecklenburg County area, which actually shows a 52% decrease over the last 2 weeks. Therefore, each of us is comfortable in that wearing a mask this morning. Cal, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Cal Ganda. I go by Cal. I was born and raised in Zimbabwe, and I moved to the U.S. in 1998, where I attended UNC Pembroke. Physically, I am a 5'7" former athlete. I used to play soccer. I like to think I'm physically fit. My kids may say it differently. I'm black as they come, proudly so, as I'm born and raised in Zimbabwe.
Awesome, awesome. So, Cal, how old were you when you came to the U.S. again?
I came to the U.S. Roughly 20 years old. I was actually just shy of 21 to attend UNC Pembroke.
Okay, and you have been in the Charlotte area ever since, or have you moved?
I first arrived to go to Pembroke, as I mentioned, and
Yes,
and then after my time in Pembroke, I worked in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and then I moved to Atlanta, Georgia area for I think about a year, and then I would move to Charlotte. So, of the 25 years that I've been in the U.S., I would say 20 of those have been in Charlotte.
That's amazing. So you've been here through a lot of different transitions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, Cal, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? What do you do for a living?
Sure. So in my full-time job, I work for Continental. They're a global organization focusing in automotive industry, among many other industries. I'm an executive in that corporation. I've been working for them for about 20 years. Outside that, I own an art gallery here in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's a platform that I'm utilizing to support my hardworking fellow African artists, and that's what I do for a living.
That's amazing. Can you tell me what inspired you to start your own art gallery?
Oh, it's a very interesting story. Probably one of the most unusual ones to get open a gallery. Quite frankly, my folks' suffering brought me here. And what do I mean by that? Most of the guys that I'm representing in this gallery, their livelihood came through tourism. When you and I would travel to many parts of Africa, you were able to pick up a few of these pieces. When COVID happened, not many people were traveling. As a matter of fact, some nations were completely locked up, if you may. And when I went home in August 2020 at the height of the pandemic and saw my people going through some very, very tough times, I thought through some ways that I could help them get back on their feet. And one of those projects that I could think about was the ability to take their art and find a home for it here in the US. And that's how the gallery, quite frankly, got open.
Wow. So, can you tell me a little bit about logistically? How did you do that? Like it just an idea sparked and then you saw the need and then how did your thought turn into this incredible art gallery?
Sure. So I always had, an idea to showcase my culture and heritage through art. And I'll bring a few pieces into the U.S. I began this October 2018. But I would always say, one day I can do it on a bigger scale because I always felt that we have very good art, and I hope you see the gallery does have some beautiful art. And I would always say one day I'll get there. But I did not realize that COVID would speed up that process. And that's what I said earlier. I'm not sure if it wasn't for the pandemic, I would have gotten the urgency that I got to open up the gallery, because once I committed to helping out my folks, if you may, I had to find a place where I would retail the art from, and that essentially forced me into this space.
That's incredible. Can I just say that is such a courageous action to take during that time frame? Because we usually hear about businesses closing down during that season, and yet you started a new business.
You would have to understand the impact that this project is having back home, and probably also coupled with that is, quite frankly, a faith-driven mission. In pure X's and O's at the beginning of the project, it did not make a lot of sense. This is for sure, because people were trying to, stabilize their food, sources, tons of things, supply chain issues, inflation, you name it. And there we were investing in a luxurious product. Art is quite honestly luxurious. If you
Right.
cannot satisfy your housing needs, your food needs, the last thing you're thinking about is art.
Yeah.
Hence, it was a faith-driven mission. But once again, I've always believed in our culture and the art and how beautiful, unique it is. That was very clear. But I also knew that if this worked, it would provide a lot of people with an opportunity to feed their families through their honest hard work. And a combination of that led me into saying, you know what? If the Lord meant it to be, He will see us through.
It's amazing. So can you tell me a little bit? Let's backtrack and let's go to the time during that season you mentioned that you went to Zimbabwe.
Yes, ma'am.
Correct? Tell me about that trip.
There were many direct routes, to go home. So, for example, I could fly from Charlotte to Atlanta, quick flight, go from there straight to Johannesburg. It's a long flight, almost 17 hours. And then from there, hour and a half, I'm back home in Harare, Zimbabwe. That's a normal way home. This time around, South Africa was closed itself. So you could not fly into South Africa. No flights were coming internationally to South Africa. I had to leave Charlotte, go through JFK, New York, Doha, Qatar, Doha, Qatar, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, straight into Zimbabwe. Upon arrival in Harare, Zimbabwe, we were whisked away in a bus, quarantined because the requirement from the government was all incoming passengers upon arrival at the airport will be quarantined for a number of days, get tested, and then they'll be released to go where they're going.
Okay.
And this is exactly what I went through. Now, looking backwards, I think it was the right thing to do, as much as it was maybe uncomfortable and inconvenient. But in an effort to contain the pandemic in these countries where the healthcare systems are not, at their best to begin with, it made total sense. But think about that. After a number of days traveling, what's typically a fairly, direct, way of go home, multiple flights connecting, a couple nights in different cities. I slept in Doha. I slept in Addis Ababa on my way home, so it's quite a long journey. Upon arrival, spent 7 days in quarantine. But it's home. I always committed to going home every single year. This year was going to be no different. I would find a way to do so. But what I didn't realize, quite frankly, is upon arrival, how much the pandemic had caused havoc in these communities, because most of the people were unable to move around. And this obviously brings, in most cases, commerce to a standstill. And then the support system, like, for example, in this part of the world, I believe there are a few programs to give people some assistance. In this part of the world, those resources aren't so available in abundance. So people, in addition to not being able to move around and find ways to feed their families, they weren't getting, let's say, reasonable amount of resources. And this, quite frankly, drove me into thinking, what can I do to support my people?
What do you think caused, because from what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, during that time there was a greater need. What do you think caused the greater need that you saw all around you?
I honestly think the first thing was, what else could they do? This is now referring back to the artist that I'm representing, because you think about that as a initial state, I'm not saying if I didn't help them, they would not have maybe survived, probably, but it was, for me, what can I do in this situation where others are suffering? What can I do? And that's one thing that I can honestly say is something my mother had always imparted in me, I always understood that I'm very blessed, and out of that comes a responsibility, because as the Bible says, to whom much is given, much is expected. So from my perspective at that moment, I knew that even though things were tough, I was among the few probably that were privileged.
Yeah.
And just seeing people that in a tough situation, it really drove me into having a sense of urgency in doing something.
Yeah. In a previous conversation we had together, you mentioned that Zimbabwe a lot of the economy is based off of tourism. Is that correct?
This is correct.
And so because of COVID, tourism was pretty much halted.
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
And so, so do you think that was one of a bigger factor that caused so many families and adults to not be able to provide?
Absolutely. As I mentioned, if you look into the art, that I have today, most of those artists survive by selling it to tourism.
Okay.
So there we have a few pieces displayed in a couple of tourist hotspots, as I'll call them. And in the midst of the pandemic, A, the art could not move around. B, you as a tourist would not be able to travel to Zimbabwe, Victoria Falls, or the safaris. And that essentially was a bigger portion of it. And then, like I also said, because in an attempt to contain the pandemic, the actual movement of people was restricted. And this also had an impact because, for the purposes of, let's say, someone goes to the market to sell tomatoes and onions, well, the movement in going to the market to buy these things to resell, just as a basic up and down, was very, very tough. Those with formal employment letters from their employers to substantiate that they're going to be at work at this hour, back home at this hour, will receive such documentation. There will be traffic checks to ensure that people are kept at home as much as possible, which, like I said before, I understood the measures and I think they were necessary to try to contain the pandemic in this environment.
So one thing that stands out to me about you, Cal, is you talk about the artists that you sell their art here at the gallery. You know them by name, and
Yes.
you know who they are. Can you share a little bit about your vision of knowing all of the artists who create the art that you sell?
It's very fulfilling because they know that we have their best interest at heart. They're people that I know, and when I walk into the gallery where they work, I greet them by name, and it for me personally, also knowing whose lives I'm changing, that's very, very fulfilling. There are a number of guys that have told us they were able to afford their children to go to certain schools that they probably would have never had a chance to do before. And some people have told us, hey, look, I was able to finish the house I was working for my parents. I was building a house for my parents. Having resources from this partnership allowed me to finish that project. Those stories are, quite frankly, one of the key reasons why I'll probably do this as long as I can.
Yeah.
Because it shows us that people's lives are changing for the better.
Yeah, you're changing lives. It's amazing.
Mine has been changed too, and as I said, I think I owe it to others.
Yeah. So again, in a previous conversation, you mentioned to me about the funding of Real African Art Gallery. Tell me a little bit about that because it's a powerful story.
Yes, so every single penny that I've used in this project, and I will say this as well, I did not spare any expenses. You see the gallery, I did my best to build in a way that allowed me to showcase my culture the right way. I never got a single penny from any single bank or anyone. It was my savings, a part of that, my retirement savings. But I'm also proud to say that through my own hard work, I was able to put something else that I dreamt about, and it's fulfilling. I'm not saying I will not accept grants that are trying to help me grow the business. That's not the point. But being able to establish the venture at a time where, to your point earlier, most small businesses were going under, receiving loans from the government to stay afloat, and to be able to go in my own resources and establish the gallery, this I am proud of.
Yeah. So now it's been 2 years?
Yes, so I opened the gallery February 1st, 2021.
Okay.
So it's a little over 2 years and 3 months.
So now that you've been 2 years and you still work at your full-time job, is that
Yes,
correct?
ma'am, I do.
And you manage this as well. Tell me a little bit about the transition of you had this thought to help your fellow countrymen. You came back, you opened this art gallery, and then now talk to me about that transition.
Sure. So in my professional world, I have always worked hard, and I've been very, very blessed to have a great career in progression. At the same time, in so doing, I quickly learned the importance of having good people around you, you know? And I knew that for this to work, I equally had to have good people around me. I've been very, very blessed. It's a common theme in my life to have people that share the mission with me and support me in running this gallery, from family to friends. I mentioned an intern across the street from UNC Charlotte. I've met many people that have supported us, you know, very genuinely. And right now, as you and I speak, on a typical week, I am not in the gallery Monday through Friday. I have a team that runs the gallery in two shifts mainly, 11 to 3, 3 to 7. I usually show up Friday evening with a little social that we have, Sip and See Fridays. That's typically when I'll show up on Friday evenings. Weekends, I probably will come in and in and out. But for the most part, I have a very good team that share the same mission I have, and they work hard to keep this place together.
It's amazing.
Yep.
So before we started talking in our interview, we did an activity together called the hand map.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there anything from your hand map that you want to share with us?
You know, as I was going through that, I realized the importance of my faith in a lot of things that I do. And one of the things that I remember, and I can look at it and cheat a little bit, the 5 things I wrote on my fingers, 2 of those had a very strong biblical inclination and what that means for me. I'm a child of God. You know, I realize that I'm very, very favored, very, very blessed. And those things humble me, they guide me. But I also realize that giving is one of the things that I have found fulfillment in. And in times when others are struggling, I seem to think about others more than I think about myself.
It's a really great trait. So tell me a little bit about, you are also a father, and so tell me about all of that. How has that transition been for you, of all the work stuff that you had with both your job and the gallery, and then also being a father?
So both my children are involved in the business as part of that crew that I was referring to. My daughter, who's 18, does work in the gallery and has been supporting the mission for quite some time. It increases our father-daughter time. That's good. My son, who's 12, helps me a lot with some, let's say, framing projects. Sometimes we are the storage together. But I've always taken fatherhood as a God-given responsibility. So throughout all that I've been through, and when I'm busy, I make sure that I spend time with my kids as much as possible. And it's a blessing, quite honestly, to be in that situation. And I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah, so over the last few years with the pandemic and with the lockdown and the restrictions and then coming out of that, how were you impacted?
I honestly can say on a personal level, I was very blessed because I think a lot of people went through significant hardship. But outside that, I would say I quickly realized once again how fragile things can be. You know, here we're flourishing, everything seemed to be just fine, and within days, all came to a halt. I travel across the world for business predominantly. I've also been going home every year forever, and just walked you through how, in my attempt to go home, all the things I went through, it was quite shocking for me. I'm like, wait a minute. These are things that we took for granted. These things we thought were everyday things all of a sudden came to a screeching halt. And that was, say, awakening. I would say that for sure. Absolutely.
How do you think your family was impacted?
At first, it was a bit tougher because, like everyone else, they couldn't go to school. We have to all coop up in the house, and we're not so used to working and learning in the same space. And now, all of a sudden, we got to find ways to make that work. But in this part of the world, with technology, we're able to at least maintain as best as possible. My family back home in Africa, not so much. As I described, they were part of that situation where not so much movement, not so much aid, and this was a bit tough.
So having family back in Zimbabwe during all of the craziness of the pandemic, what was going through your mind? What were you feeling?
I kept praying hard that the balance between the movement that was being restricted and some level of opening up so folks can go find things to do would happen quicker than quick, because that was outside of that. You continuously are supporting people through your own pockets to a certain degree, but you now know that's not sustainable.
Yeah.
So while you are trying the best you can to support in the heat of the moment, you certainly are hoping and praying that things open up as soon as possible. And while you're on one end saying, man, if this happens too quick and there's not enough containment, this could be really challenging. So all in all, it was trying. It was a very challenging moment because not many of us could see where things were heading, and this was very, very challenging.
So if you compare your experience with the restrictions here compared to Zimbabwe, what were some of the similarities and what were some of the differences?
I think in general, in the earlier days especially, there was an attempt to restrict movement. I mean, but the only difference was the enforcement of such. I think people in this part of the world were more left to self-policing, as I would call it. Mm-hmm. Whereas you didn't have that approach back home. You had actual police in the physical streets ensuring that you're not moving point A to point B unnecessarily.
Yeah.
So that was one of the biggest differences, I would say. But the attempt to, let's say, educate people on the unknowns of the pandemic, I would say with technology today, news access, this was something I would say was done fairly well on both sides.
Okay.
Yep.
Do you find that in Zimbabwe, were there opportunities for people to work from home, or was it kind of like a standstill because of the restriction movement?
Exactly. So as I said, a lot of people are self-employed. The number of people are, so they get up, they go sell something, they go do something.
Yeah.
And by virtue of that, they don't have the luxury of, let's say, working from home. Whereas with the more service-oriented type of workforce in our U.S. economy, lots more people can do that. Technology as well was another part of it. Not many people have Wi-Fi access at their homes as easy as we have it in the U.S. So this definitely would have impacted those two worlds.
Yeah. And then as a father, for you, you mentioned that it was a little bit of a challenge to work from home as well as your kids doing school from home.
Exactly.
How did they adapt to kind of their restrictions of going to school and then maybe going hybrid? And then tell me about that.
Luckily, my daughter, who was at that point in time in high school, was a bit mature to self-organize and be able to follow instructions on her own. This helped a lot, but still, I think there was some uneasiness with the back and forth because she did do hybrid. My son, on the other end, initially was a bit tougher because me trying to get him structured. I mean, you're talking about a 9-10-year-old at that point in time, trying to get him structured enough to where he sits still and independently, because I have to be back in my office doing my own work. Mm-hmm. This was a bit of a challenge, but we work through it. Every few breaks I would make sure that I would go check on him, ensure that he's staying on task. And I think once the school teachers also began to create a rhythm on how they went about the curriculum, this also helped. But overall, those first early days were a bit of a challenge, but I would say eventually we kind of all got in the rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's great. What do you think is one of the most valuable lessons you learned as a father in that season?
We can adapt. I think that was one thing that, because at first you're like, wait a minute, how is this going to work?
Yeah.
Because you're just not, that's how it's going to work. But people can adapt. Challenges can make us better or they can break us. Yeah. And in this case, it was clear that things weren't ending tomorrow, as we probably all thought initially. Yeah. And then it meant we had to buckle up.
Yeah.
Yep.
What do you think was one of the greatest challenges, but also, on the other hand, the greatest strength of opening up a small business? during the last 2 years?
Given that we are now this 2+ years and the pandemic is still lingering around, and yet we've been able to keep the doors open, supporting these hardworking artists, it emboldens me and makes me feel like, okay, if I can survive these times when things get better or things get normal, if whatever it's supposed to be in some future, what can we have as opportunities? So I use this time to say we are grinding through it. It's not been easy, this is for sure. But if we can survive this environment, it just, makes us feel that the future for us is much, much brighter.
That's amazing. And then you mentioned you still worked full-time during all of this.
Yes, ma'am.
How was your job impacted? Because you also mentioned that you used to do a lot of traveling for work.
Yes.
And that kind of halted. So tell me about the transition at work.
Absolutely. At work, like I mentioned, I traveled quite extensively within the Americas. And all of a sudden, let me go back one story actually. When the initial borders closing, if you may, this was in March 2020, when this first was announced by the government, I was in Mexico, as a matter of fact, with my European boss. And I think one of the first things that happened was Europeans could not come into the US. He wasn't sure if he would be able to fly from Mexico back to the US because it was just Europeans in general could not come into the US. So we frantically hopped on a flight in the middle of our business trip to come back to the US before he could not be able to return. And that was the beginning of the challenge. And what used to be a routine monthly travel to Canada, Brazil, Mexico for business, all of a sudden went down to zero. And now you have to adapt, get on screens and begin to speak to folks through Teams and Zoom and all these things. And this is also speaking about resilience, being able to adapt. But in business, either you do so or you go under, and you have to find ways to make it work.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that some of those lessons that you learned through your job helped you with starting your own business?
Absolutely. Most of what I apply to my small business today, I did learn from my full-time responsibility. I've worked in logistics, which is a big portion of how these goods arrive here. And that's certainly things I can attribute to my full-time job.
Tell me more about that.
As I mentioned, which once again is something else I like to remind folks, I've been extremely blessed. In Continental, I've worked in manufacturing. I've worked in logistics. I've worked in sales and marketing, and the opportunity to do so with a global organization where goods are moving across continents and going to market, in some cases to retailers, you learn so much about business. Mm-hmm. And to be able to take parts and parcels of that experience and employ it in my own small venture, teach my family home back home in Africa that supports me in the venture, mm-hmm. what it means to buy goods, move them internationally, dealing with third-party companies that clear logistics, ferry goods across borders, all the documentation needed, and really teach them business skills, how to negotiate. Mm-hmm. I think these are things that I can go on and on when the goods arrive in the U.S., working with parties that can move the goods for me from the port of entry all the way to my storage. These are things, once again, that I can say, look, this is clearly something else at Continental I learned at this point in my life.
It's amazing. It's amazing, truly. To make this art gallery a success, as you're talking about logistics, it brings to mind that you probably need someone there to help you with the logistics of the shipping and the purchasing of the art. Do you have someone that supports you there in Zimbabwe?
Yes. So once again, speaking about finding people to support you, people that share the same mission you have, it's a lot to get this art here. It's highly fragile, and not only are artists that are making the art getting a chance to feed their families through their hard work, we have a crew that does the creating and packaging, a very important part of this particular process. And this really allows us to, once again, lift a lot of people out of poverty in some cases and provide so many people chances to learn about business. And I've been very fortunate to have that chance.
So do you in addition to the artists, do you hire people in Zimbabwe to help you with packaging and with shipping, and what does that look like?
Exactly. So we have a crew that once the piece of art is finished, nicely polished, they will take it, carefully package it, wrap it, and put it in, depending on the size and the fragility, they will make sure that it's properly wrapped up. They'll hand build these crates and like jigsaw puzzle type approach, stuffing material to protect each individual piece, package crate by crate, seal it, load these crates into a container that will get through here, here through ocean freight.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of work. And to have, you take a look at this art, it gets
Yeah.
here nice and safe and shiny. And to do so, it's really, really a skillful job, if you may. Yes.
I can imagine.
Yes, ma'am.
A lot of the art that you have is, it's fragile.
Yes, ma'am.
And it's beautiful, and there's so many crevices, and all of those have to be preserved.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, how did you find that team to help you?
So within the gallery where the artists that make the art are working, there are some of these guys. So as you are,
Okay.
yes. So as you are negotiating with the artists to buy the art, they present themselves and offer their services, and
Awesome.
we hire them for their services.
So, the process for you, was it a smooth process?
For the most part, it was. The art that I have in the gallery is coming about 5 miles from where I'm born and raised in Zimbabwe.
Okay.
So as I mentioned, we know most of the artists. So once we buy the art, we have another crew that will come in right there in the space where we buy the art. They'll do all the packaging, and we'll have the container come right to that particular place as well and get loaded. So this is a fairly smooth process. And once it's picked up, a driver takes the container to the nearest port, and ocean freight arrives in Charleston, South Carolina. Another company picks it up for us and bring it to our storage.
Awesome.
Yep.
It's amazing. So, Cal, as I reflect upon all the things that you've shared with me, sounds like the last few years have been very busy.
This is true.
So tell me, what do you do to help you release the stress of juggling everything?
I'm a car lover. I own an old sports car, a classic sports car. A nice drive in my 1966 Ford Mustang GT is a very relaxing one. I also, every once in a while, try to get on the basketball court with my son. He's 12. He plays in school, unlike me, so it's getting to be a bit tougher to beat him. Quite frankly, I cannot beat him anymore. But those things are fun.
That's awesome.
Those things are fun.
That's really great, Cal. And then you also mentioned that faith is a really big part of your life. Are you involved in a community of faith?
Yes, so I actively was a member of Hickory Grove Christian. My children today, both of them went to the school. My son is still actually going to school there. With the pandemic, which is probably my excuse, I kind of fell off a little bit, but I pray every day. And as a body of faith, I still recognize Hickory Grove as my home church.
Yeah. Have you found that throughout COVID and the different seasons of pandemic restrictions and then releasing of those restrictions and more freedom, do you find that, how is your community impacted here, your local community?
Absolutely. I think a lot of people that did not have the opportunities to work from home, and now I'm talking about people that had to go in, people working in the warehouses, people working in food industry, and in most cases, for whatever reason, they're people of color. You know, people that I, in this community, associate with. I think they were probably a lot more impacted than others that would have had the opportunities to, let's say, work from home and all those things. And that's one of those things where you see in times like these, the impact of the disparities in our community and how our income levels and our jobs, quite frankly, can put us to experience a pandemic in vastly different ways. And I reference myself as being one of the lucky ones because I'm in a white collar environment and all those things didn't impact me as much as some of my friends that had to go in. So this is something that, personally you reflect on and you certainly can be thankful and learn from.
Yeah. What are some of the things that you saw and that you learned from during the time?
Yeah, I mean, I had people that say, hey, look, I wish actually, based on all the things in my life, would not want to go into a work environment, because some, for different reasons, were not up to that situation.
Yeah.
Yet they had to go, as I mentioned, because of the type of work that they have to, that they do. This bothered me a little bit because then I'm like, oh man, this is a tough situation because if there's anyone else based on how they feel and their health situations, they for sure maybe should not, but then there's no alternative because they equally had to feed their families. This was tough.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's extremely tough.
Yes.
For sure. So, how do you think that your friendships or even your family dynamics were changed and impacted during the pandemic?
As I call myself a big butterfly socially. I mean, I'm a people-loving person naturally, and in the pandemic, there was a certain level of distance that we had to exercise, and there's certain things that I'm a big hugger. My kids sometimes kiss them too much, but this also had to have certain, let's say, restrictions. Because of the times that we're in, and that's a bit different. If all our lives, handshake means respect, means, hey, I'll do business with you, I'll talk to you, and all of a sudden it's something else you cannot do. This is different.
Yeah. Definitely. What were some ways that you overcame those social struggles? Because, during isolation, we couldn't necessarily connect with people in person as often.
I discovered the power of video calling because there was an attempt, especially for those you care, to try to find a way for them to know, hey, you're okay and you care for them and I want to see your face. So I wasn't much of a video caller type of person, but this changed a little bit. My siblings back in Africa, my kids sometimes, even when we're different places, but that was also something else I kind of had to adapt to.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
For sure. Well, thank you so much, Cal. Before we end, and to respect your time, is there an experience or a story that you would like to share with us before we finish?
I think I've covered the highlights of what the pandemic and my situation in the gallery has been. But in closing, I would say resilience is one word I want to maybe use to describe how I feel about the pandemic. We've been resilient through it. Mm-hmm. And if we take that resilience and apply it maybe to a broader scope of life's aspects, is where at least I'm working out of this with. I'm not saying it's over by any means. Very clearly, I think we still have the pandemic. You begin by reciting numbers for people that are still being impacted. But I truly believe that through our resilience, we can make it through. One more word, caring. I oftentimes have believed, you can help someone somehow. And I'm not talking about being able to help just financially, for example, but just taking time to check on those that need it. Some people don't have a chance to have someone else to help them cross the street. Mm-hmm. There are many things that we can do to care for others and for one another. And I truly believe these have to be things that we think about.
Yeah, so lovely. Thank you, Cal. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for all that you do.
Thank you very much. I sure appreciate you. I really do.